As Republicans ask, can Trump be dumped? The candidate fights back to save his presidential bid. Good evening. This is Fear and Loathing in Missouri. The debate in just over 7 hours' time here in St. Louis could be the sleaziest presidential debate in American history. The question, who will sink the lowest? After the uproar over Donald Trump's comment about grabbing women's crotches, his side has accused Hillary Clinton of giving cover to Bill Clinton's sexual assault of women. And the Republicans, the party of Lincoln, Eisenhower and Reagan, is powerless to force Donald Trump to quit.
Also in the programme, the United States says it'll review its support for the Saudi-led bombing campaign in Yemen after at least 140 people were killed yesterday by a Saudi airstrike. 80 years after clashes to prevent fascists marching through East London, marchers commemorate the Battle of Cable Street.
His campaign is threatening to implode and leading Republicans are fleeing in droves and threatening to resign. But Donald Trump is heading to tonight's presidential debate here in St. Louis in a defiant mood, frankly, calling his critics so many self-righteous hypocrites. This scandal has not just split the party, but also the country. One poll showing that 43% of Americans want him to drop out. Tonight, though, there is no sign of that. The man high-fiving with his fist in the air is fighting for political survival. Donald J. Trump, Republican candidate for president, insists he's had a torrent of support since the release of a 10-year-old recording in which he used vulgar, sexist language caught on a hot mic.
You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the you can do anything.
After the recording was made public, scores of Republicans deserted their own candidate, some disendorsing him, others calling on him to step aside altogether.
I believe our only option is to formally ask Mr. Trump to step down and to allow Republicans the opportunity to elect someone who will provide us with the strong leadership so desperately needed and one that Americans deserve.
But that's not realistic. Thousands of Americans have already cast early votes for Trump and his vice presidential nominee, Mike Pence. Even if the party agreed to change the ticket, it is, for all intents and purposes, stuck with the candidate they have. Trump loyalists like Rudy Giuliani sought to defend him by accusing Hillary Clinton of herself enabling sexual assault.
It is true that he said something and said a group of things during that interview that are reprehensible and terrible and awful, and he feels terrible about it. Yeah. It was 10 or 12 years ago. He wasn't at that time, running for office. He wasn't thinking of office.
On the campus where tonight's debate will be held, Trump supporters like Jeannie Ames were in the minority, but determined to stand by their man.
He's owned it. He's apologized for it. At the time of the statements, he was a private citizen. I am voting for Donald Trump because I vote guns and money.
Can we trust him to protect women's rights?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Members of the campus Republican club weren't so generous. He's lost Paul's support.
Really voting for free speech in this election. So I didn't see a problem with that, with his previous rhetoric, and the media attacking people for having different views is really something that cemented my support for him. But I saw him as a family man. I knew him as building a great business, and his comments were absolutely, in Hillary's words, deplorable.
Deplorable to the Republicans who only now are withdrawing support.
And they thought, he's the Republican, and as long as somebody has an R next to their name, I'm going to vote for them no matter what. I personally don't think that Hillary Clinton is fit to be president. I won't be voting for her, but Donald Trump absolutely does not represent the conservatism that I believe in.
Hillary supporters, meanwhile, are sounding and looking empowered.
I don't foresee any scenario where a man could talk about sexually assaulting a woman in such just a bragging, presumptuous, idiotic manner, and I just couldn't vote for that person.
Donald Trump has shown in the past his campaign ignores the norms of political gravity, but it's impossible to overstate how high the stakes will be when he walks onto the debate stage this evening. Well, I'm joined now by MTV's senior political correspondent, Anna Marie Cox. Anna Marie, can Donald Trump survive this?
Well, I think we've learned in this election cycle to never say never, to never really say for sure. So, I mean, is it possible? Yes, unlikely, I would say, yeah.
What does he have to do in the debate tonight? I mean, he and Giuliani seem to be kind of telegraphing different approaches. He is doubling down,
right,
and Giuliani is saying, no, he's incredibly contrite.
Right. Well, one of them is the candidate and one of them is the candidate surrogate. So I tend to believe it's the candidate that's probably going to make the final decision. It's unless, you know, Kellyanne Conway manages to put some Xanax in his Kentucky Fried Chicken.
That's his campaign manager.
Right. Unless someone force feeds him some Xanax or other kind of downer, I don't know how they're going to keep control of him. I imagine, I don't know, to me it's inconceivable that one would double down on something that's basically sexual assault. But he will find a way.
I mean, we just spoke to some Trump supporters who said, look, he's outspoken, he's contrite, he has a better plan for the country, we're sticking with him. I mean, the country seems split over whether this should be kind of a fatal blow to the campaign.
Right. Well, there's going to be, unfortunately, about 40% of America that probably votes for him no matter what he does tonight. The good news is 40% is not a majority. And also, you know, the people he needed to win over are the people who are going to be most offended by what he's done. White, college-educated women, people with college degrees in general. Those people are not going to be very forgiving. So I think he is going to have a huge, huge problem, and especially if he winds up going after Hillary Clinton very aggressively, I don't think that's going to be a good look for him, as we say.
I mean, the polling is suggested that when he does, or even in the past when Rudy Giuliani has brought up Bill Clinton's infidelities and tried to link Hillary Clinton to them, that sympathy for Hillary Clinton rises at that point. Does that still hold true?
I believe so. I mean, if you look historically at her approval ratings, they have been the highest, absolute highest, when Clinton has been, when her husband has been the most under fire. I think that a lot of women, for better or for worse, tend to find her the sympathetic character in this story, even when she lashes out at the other woman, because people understand why you might do that. I think people don't understand, and women especially don't understand the way that Donald Trump talked about women. And I want to be very clear, it's not the vulgarity. It's the actions that he described that people are offended by.
So it's not the language. It's not that suddenly America has come over all kind of high and mighty and moralistic.
Moralistic only about, you know, committing a sexual assault, which I think is what he describes in that. And I want to say that I'm very pleased by the number of people who've come out describing it that way.
Right, yeah. Anna Marie Cox, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's going to be a very, very interesting night, isn't it?
Interesting night.
Now, we're going to move on to what's been happening in Haiti, of course, the terrible effects of Hurricane Matthew. There, they've begun 3 days of national mourning for the victims of the hurricane, which ripped through the south of the country, leaving at least 900 people dead. Officials said that more than 350,000 people were now urgently in need of aid, while cholera is already beginning to spread. The storm flattened countless homes, leaving some villages totally cut off by collapsed bridges and roads. Relief workers warned that many people don't have access to food, shelter, or clean water supplies. Now, while Hurricane Matthew has caused widespread flooding and damage across North Carolina and Virginia, despite now being downgraded to a post-tropical cyclone, storm surges and high tides brought down power lines and flooded roads. More than 2 million households in Southeast America have been left without power. That's it from St. Louis. We may be back a little bit later on, but for now, it's back to you in the studio, Jackie.
Thanks, Kylie. Saudi Arabia says it will investigate the bombing of a funeral in Yemen, which killed more than 140 people. Thousands of people took to the streets of the capital, Sana'a, today to protest against the attack. Britain sells millions of pounds worth of arms to Saudi Arabia. The Saudi-led coalition under a UN mandate is fighting Yemeni rebels who seized control of the capital in September 2014. Tonight, the White House says it's reviewing support for the Saudi-led coalition after it's repeatedly bombed civilians. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, has the latest.
Already bombed once, scores are dead, dying and injured, and they bomb it again. He said there were 2 jets and 4 bombs. How could they attack a funeral, he asked. The funeral, indeed, of a rebel minister's father, hit by the Saudi-led coalition fighting under UN mandate. Saudi Arabia claims it never targets civilians. Well, it certainly keeps on hitting them in Yemen. First, the Saudis denied responsibility altogether. Now they accept it was them, and they've ordered an investigation. Yemen's acting health minister spoke of an inhuman crime against humanity, and he said, "We hold the UN responsible for these continuing crimes against the Yemeni people." Today, the International Red Cross condemned the attack in unusually strong terms, calling it abhorrent. Several official sources now confirm at least 140 people killed, more than 525 injured. The US saying it'll review its already reduced support for the Saudi-led bombing campaign in Yemen. Not so the UK, though, which sells millions of pounds of weapons to Saudi Arabia. When Russia or Syria bombs civilians in East Aleppo, the British government's quick to talk about potential war crimes. In Yemen, with lucrative arms sales at stake to Saudi Arabia, the response is entirely different.
We keep the arms export licenses, which are some of the toughest regime in the world as to how we sell arms. We keep it under constant review. But we do encourage the Saudis to investigate these allegations. And obviously, if it turns out any of these attacks on civilians were deliberate, then that would, of course, affect our export license criteria.
Anger, predictably, on the streets of the Yemeni capital today. Few, it seems, outside the British government trust the Saudis to investigate the Saudis as they continue to bomb civilians here again and again.
We call for the forming of an international independent committee to investigate the crimes of the Saudi aggressors, the crimes they've committed against the Yemeni people, and the latest of those crimes is the mother of them all.
This afternoon, the Foreign Office issued a press release saying there is no military solution to the war in Yemen. So Channel 4 News asked them if that's true, why are we arming one side? We're still waiting for an answer.
Alex Thompson reporting there. A Palestinian gunman has killed 2 people and wounded 4 others in Jerusalem before he was shot dead by police as he tried to escape. The attacker, a member of the extremist Hamas group who was about to begin a prison term, opened fire from a car at people who were waiting at a tram stop. A woman and a police officer later died in hospital. Government ministers say they've now ruled out making companies publish lists of foreign workers, as leading Conservatives described the plan as repugnant. Home Secretary Amber Rudd announced the move at the Tory conference, but the idea was condemned as divisive and xenophobic. Today, ministers insisted the data had been intended as a way of improving skills training.
The test should ensure people coming... That is really about collecting the right evidence that we will need if we're going to be able to respond to skills shortages of employers. This is not data that will be published.
There's been another setback for Jeremy Corbyn as 2 Labour whips resigned over his front bench reshuffle. Conor McGinn and Holly Lynch stepped down after Chief Whip Rosie Winterton was sacked. Some leading MPs complained they'd be kept in the dark about the shake-up and wanted some of the posts in the shadow cabinet to be elected. Jewish and Muslim leaders have marched side by side with trade unionists and other left-wing groups to mark the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Cable Street, when tens of thousands of anti-fascist protesters clashed with police in East London. Speakers told the crowds there was still a need to stand up against fascism and intolerance today, as James Blake reports.
It was a critical moment. Hitler in power, the far right on the rise in Europe. And in London, the British Union of Fascists planned a march through a Jewish community in East London.
And Sir Oswald Mosley, black shirt leader, arrives at Royal Mint Street to inspect his followers.
The government allowed the march. The Met Police told local people to stay away. They refused and made their stand on Cable Street.
Altogether, 84 rioters are taken into custody, while the police firmly prevent the battle from taking an uglier turn.
Today, hundreds gathered to commemorate that day. In the mix, Muslim and Jewish groups alongside unions, socialists, anarchists and communists.
They shall not pass. It was the rallying cry of the anti-fascist alliance 80 years ago.
Then, 20,000 strong, they barricaded this street right here to stop Oswald Mosley and his black shirts from entering East London.
101-year-old Max Levitas was there in 1936.
And did you see any of the black shirts?
They ran for their lives. It was a battle against the police. Whereas when those things always happened, when you had demonstrations.
Gloria Finley's late husband was one of the organisers.
They tore up cobblestones, as they were in those days, and anything to stop the Muslims getting free passage. The battle went on all day long. Hundreds of people were arrested and thrown into the police prison cells.
Nearby in Shoreditch, the London mayor joined the chief rabbi to speak out against racism.
It's really important we are united in our quest to defeat anti-Semitism, racism, fascism, Islamophobia and all forms of hate crime.
Within the Labour Party itself, there have been allegations of anti-Semitism by members. The recent Chakrabarti report highlights minority, hateful and ignorant attitudes.
Well, the Labour Party, along with many other institutions, along with other political parties, have huge problems, not just with anti-Semitism and racism, but also with Islamophobia. These are national challenges.
Back at Cable Street, Jeremy Corbyn faced his own struggle to leave the event, but one question did make him stop.
Mr. Corbyn, do you think the Labour Party has its own problems with anti-Semitism?
I think you should remember that Cable Street was an amazing exposition of people coming together in total unity to oppose racism in any form. Everyone here, me included, opposes racism in any form whatsoever in our society.
80 years ago, the anti-fascists won the day. Oswald Mosley abandoned his march, and fascism didn't take hold in Britain.
Well, Mark Regev, the Israeli ambassador to the UK, was at one of this afternoon's commemorations and joins me now. Mr. Regev, why, for you, is Cable Street so important?
Well, obviously, it's a proud moment in British political history. But also, I thought there was a need for me to attend and for me to write the piece in The Guardian, because I wanted to remind people that in 1936, those anti-fascist demonstrators, the trade unionists, the progressives, the Labour Party members and the others demonstrating there were all fundamentally and unabashedly pro-Zionist. It was part of the trade union platform, it was part of the Labour Party platform, and I wanted to remind people of the history of support from Labour back in those days for Zionism.
It's quite an extraordinary move as a relatively new ambassador to come in and basically attack the Labour Party, the leader of the Labour Party, who may want hopes to go on to become the Prime Minister.
I didn't attack anyone. I don't know why you say that.
Do you not think that the tone of the article is very direct attack on Labour and a problem they've got with anti-Semitism?
On the contrary. On the contrary. It's important to remember that in that period of the 1930s and 1940s, for the left as a whole, Zionism was seen as an important part of a progressive agenda, a progressive internationalism, that the Jewish struggle for equality among the nations was seen as making the world part of a better place. Now, today, many people in Labour, I'd say the majority probably, support that position, that they believe Israel has a right to exist. But there have been elements, as the Labour Party's been very hostile elements to the Jewish state, and I think it's my job as ambassador to speak out for historic truth.
But, I mean, a huge amount has changed in the past 80 years, and there are many people, Jewish people, non-Jewish people, people within and without the Labour Party, who are very angry about the way the government of Israel has acted over the last 2 decades. And many of those people argue that any criticism at all of Israeli government is shut down by people accusing them of being anti-Semitic.
I would totally reject that, because we're not talking about Israeli government policy. If you want, Jackie, to have a discussion about Israeli government policy, I'm very happy to do that. But people can debate Russian government policy, French government policy, Italian government policy, but no one denies the very right of those countries to exist. Yet some people say that my country has no right to exist, that the Jewish people have no right to national self-determination. What's going on here?
But what about the argument that they feel they cannot criticise Israel as a state without being called anti-Semitic? It's a way of shutting down debate.
I don't think that's true. I think it's a straw man. the Israeli public, the Israeli press, the Israeli parliament, we have vibrant debates about different policies, what is right, what is wrong, which policy is effective, which policy works, which policy doesn't work. Our parliament mirrors your parliament that way. But if someone stands up and says the Jewish people have no right to national self-determination, that the Jewish state has no right to exist, not in any borders, that is something else. I mean, if people focus an irrational hatred on Israel, what's that all about?
Well, you've made a very direct link with the Labour movement, with the Labour Party. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn has been at pains to say that the party is determined to fight any anti-Jewish hatred with every breath of its body. It's had the Shami Chakrabarti report. You're not satisfied with that? Do you still think that they haven't gone far enough? You don't trust Mr Corbyn on this?
I was in Liverpool when he came out very strongly in his speech there as leader against anti-Semitism. And obviously identifying a problem is an important move into solving an issue. And I hope that we can agree. Obviously, me and Mr Corbyn don't agree on everything, but I hope we can agree.
Your article suggests that you don't yet trust the party.
I didn't mention Corbyn once in my article. I want to be very clear. I hope me and Mr Corbyn can agree that the Jewish state has a right to exist in security, in peace, with recognition. I hope that we could unite in condemning hate speech, because hate speech makes peace much more difficult. I hope that we could agree that the future is negotiations, and through dialogue we'll make peace with Israelis and Palestinians.
Very briefly, I'm sorry, we're running out of time, but the US government have criticised Israel for agreeing to new settlements. I mean, that is something that people feel very, very strongly about. They've said that it will be a blockade to peace.
The issue of settlement, the issue of refugees, the issue of security, the issue of legitimacy, all the core issues of the conflict have to be resolved through negotiations. And we're ready to immediately start those peace talks today. The trouble is the Palestinians have refused to do so.
The settlement stands in the way of that.
I would argue that all the issues can be negotiated and solved if there's goodwill.
Mark Regev, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Now, a look ahead to what's coming up tomorrow. In the latest of our No Go Britain series, we'll be looking at the growing number of children dealing with anxiety and depression.
Like, this all stemmed from anxiety. So, like, even though it is in your head, well, not like it is in your mind and you can't see it, it does affect loads of other physical things.
Sport now, and in Formula One, Nico Rosberg extended his lead in the championships to 33 points after winning the Japanese Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton finished third, never quite recovering from a disastrous start that saw him drop from second to 8th place in the opening lap. There are now just 4 races left in the Formula One season. Football, and Wales and Georgia are currently playing in a World Cup qualifier in Cardiff. Gareth Bale gave Wales the lead with a close-range header early in the first half. With the match in injury time, the score is now Wales 1, Georgia 1. In the cricket, there were angry scenes as Bangladesh beat England in the second one-day match in Dhaka. England captain Jos Buttler turned to confront members of the Bangladesh team after he was dismissed for 57. Bangladesh went on to win the match by 34 runs to draw level in the series with 1 match to play. Tennis, and Britain's Andy Murray has won the China Open to claim his 5th title of the season. The Wimbledon and Olympic champion beat Bulgaria's Grigor Dimitrov in straight sets in Beijing. Murray won without losing a set during the tournament. The British #1 has now won 40 singles titles in his career. Let's now go back to Kylie Morris in Missouri. Kylie.
Well, here in St. Louis, the stage is set for tonight's crucial presidential debate. Donald Trump is insisting there is no way he's going to quit this race, despite the increasing ranks of leading Republicans now refusing to endorse him or calling on him to resign. Of course, Mr. Trump still does have plenty of supporters, among them the UKIP leader Nigel Farage, who joins me now. Nigel, you've talked about these comments as kind of alpha male boasting. That's dismissing them a little lightly, isn't it?
Well, I said ugly alpha male boasting, and that's what it is. Look, it's not pretty, it's horrible. It's horrible, and I can completely understand why many in the Republican Party are running for the hills, because they're in states with a big religious vote and they're very worried about keeping their seats on Capitol Hill. I get all of that. Ultimately, it would have been a very bad day for Hillary Clinton yesterday. There were lots of revelations about her relationship with Wall Street, and this overshadowed it completely.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah. but there's one thing about being, you know, politically expeditious, running for the hills, but there's also saying this makes him unfit to be president. Can't you say now, I mean, surely a man like this should not be the president of the United States?
Do you know something? I don't think there's any one of us who haven't said or done things in the last decade we would not want to have been secretly recorded and put on the news. I don't like it any more than you do.
But we're not running for president.
No,
He's running for president.
We're not. Does this disqualify him from being president? I don't think it does, and I don't think it will. And whilst there are many in the political class and the media class who will be horrified by what he said, let me tell you, yesterday I asked waitresses, I asked people, mixed race, all around this city yesterday, what they thought about Trump's comments. And most of them said, typical, what we would expect from him. So I don't actually think with his core voters it's going to make a difference. But with the undecideds, he's got to do very well tonight, and he's going to have to apologise and be seen to mean it.
Briefly, let's look at what's been happening between, with other members of your party, with Mike Hookham and Stephen Wolfe. There's been ugliness there. You've been to visit Stephen Wolfe, haven't you? They have differing versions of what happened. Yeah. Whose version do you believe? Oh,
I've launched an inquiry, and on Tuesday and Wednesday this week, we will take witness statements from everybody that was in that room and was outside that room, and we will reach a conclusion. I think to prejudge or to try and apportion blame right now is a mistake. Something happened outside those doors, between those two guys. I didn't see it.
So even though you've spoken to Stephen Wolfe, you don't think you have a full account of what happened?
I've spoken to Stephen Wolfe and I've spoken to Mike Hookham, and they both have very... Do you know, when there's a car crash and both sides, both parties write down what happened, you get very different accounts. There were people outside that room that witnessed what happened. We will get to the bottom of it.
It's ugly, isn't it? Sex here, knock 'em down politics in Europe. I mean,
It's,
how have we reached this point? At which point did well-mannered discourse about politics fall away? I mean, certainly in Brexit, in the debate around Brexit, there wasn't a lot of politeness. You played a role in that, didn't you?
Yeah, men behaving very badly, I think, sums up a lot of the last week. Look, you know, I during the Brexit debate, I did my best not to engage.
Well, there's quite a lot of bad behaviour in street fighting in the Brexit.
But you know what? Hasn't there always been in political campaigns? Is it really any worse than it used to be? I'm not sure.
Well, I'm not sure that we've ever seen a US presidential debate where people are talking about whether or not other people's sexual infidelities and grabbing women by crotches is part of the political conversation.
Well, we saw worse than that when Mr. Clinton was president a few years ago. Look, you know, we've been going you could argue we've been going downhill for years, but perhaps it's a function of the fact that everyone's got iPhones, everyone can record stuff that you say, and I think this is a feature we're going to have to live with in the future, sadly.
Is Donald Trump going to survive this?
Yes, he will. I mean, effectively, he's almost...
Does he deserve to, though, Mr. Farage? I mean, aren't we really at the point where you should be joining those Republicans running for the hills and saying, look, it's really not, it's not on?
I mean, I've never endorsed him, to be fair, you know. I mean,
well, you appeared on stage with him.
Because I was telling the Brexit story, and there is a big carryover here. Look, those undecided voters out there, those blue-collar voters out there who probably don't normally vote in presidential elections, the real question is, are they offended by what Trump said? Or do they think that from a man who's been married 5 times, do you know what? This is the kind of guy he is. We may not like him very much, but maybe he represents the kind of change that we need. And I think it's too early to judge whether this incident has torpedoed his campaign or not. The one thing that's for certain is he's going to have to do very well tonight.
I mean, it's not a good moment in politics for women, is it?
No, I don't think it is. I would really agree with that. And yes, accusations that politics is a sexist male club, which have been made for many decades.
Well, your own leader left after just 18 days, didn't she, a woman leader?
Well, the fact we elected a woman leader shows that our party wanted to have a woman leader. No, it's not been a great week for women in politics. I get that.
Farage, thank you very much. Now, and you can watch tonight's US presidential debate live here on Channel 4 in a special program starting at 1:30 tomorrow morning. All the highlights, and there will be some, on All 4 from 8 a.m. Until then, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.